At what point would the matron mistress of the academy get suspicious? 1,000 years? 10,000? Or might the faceless one live Menzoberran's on itself? Life as a master was not such a bad lot, Alton supposed. Many drow would sacrifice much to be given such an honor. Alton dropped his face into the crook of his elbow and forced away such ridiculous thoughts. He was not a real master, nor did the stolen position bring him any measure of satisfaction. Perhaps Massage should have shot him that day, 16 years ago, when Alton was trapped in the faceless one's web. Alton's despair only deepened when he considered the actual time frame involved. He had just passed his 70th birthday and was still young by drow standards. The notion that only a tenth of his life was behind him was not a comforting one to Alton de Ville this night. How long will I survive? He asked himself. How long until this madness that is my existence consumes me? Alton looked back out over the city.
Hey, Fire, how
It was
you
the
doing?
faceless one that killed me, he whispered. For now I am Alton of no house worth mentioning. Massage had dubbed him that on the first morning after House de Vire's fall. But way back then, with his life teetering on the edge of a crossbow, Alton had not understood the title's implications. Menzoberranzon was nothing more than a collection of individual houses. A rogue commoner might latch onto one of them to call his own, but a rogue noble wouldn't likely be accepted by any house in the city. He was left with Sorcerer and nothing more
Pay didn't go too
until
bad.
his true
Can't
identity
complain
was
too
discovered
much.
at last. What punishments would he then face for the crime of killing the master? Massage may have committed the crime, but Massage had a house to defend him. Alton was only a rogue noble. He sat back on his elbows and watched the rising heat-light of Northern. As the minutes became hours, Alton's despair and self-pity went through inevitable change. He turned his attention to the individual drow houses now, not to the conglomeration that bound them as a city, and he wondered what dark secrets each harbored. One of them, Alton reminded himself, held the secret he most dearly wanted to know. One of them had wiped out House de Ville. Forgotten was the night's failure with Matron Jennifer and the Yako. Forgotten was the lament for an early death. 16 years was not so long a time, Alton decided. He had perhaps 7 centuries of life left within his slender frame. If he had to, Alton was prepared to spend every minute of those long years searching for the perpetrating house. Vengeance, he growled aloud, needing, feeding off that audible reminder of his only reason for continuing to draw breath. 8. Kindred. Zack pressed in with a series of low thrusts. Drizzt tried to back away quickly and return to even footing, but the relentless assault followed his every step, and he was forced to keep his movements solely on the defensive. More often than not, Drizzt found the hilts of his weapons closer to Zack than the blades. Zack then dropped into a low crouch and came up under Drizzt's defense. Drizzt twirled his scimitars in a masterful cross, but he had to straighten stiffly to dodge the weapon master's equally deft assault. Drizzt knew that he had been set up, and he fully expected the next attack as Zack shifted his weight to his back leg and dived in, both sword tips aimed for Drizzt's loins. Drizzt spat a silent curse and spun his scimitars into a downward cross, meaning to use the V of his blades to catch his teacher's swords. On a sudden impulse, Drizzt hesitated as he intercepted Zack's weapons, and he jumped away instead, taking a painful slap on the inside of one thigh. Disgusted, he threw both of his scimitars to the floor. Zack, too, leaped back. He held his swords out to his sides, a look of sincere confusion on his face. "You should not have missed that move," he said bluntly. "The parry is wrong," Drizzt replied. Awaiting further explanation, Zack lowered one sword tip to the floor and leaned on the weapon. In past years, Zack had wounded, even killed students for such blatant defiance. "The cross-down defeats the attack, but to what gain?" Drizzt continued. "When the move is completed, my sword tips remain down too low for any effective attack routine, and you are able to slip back and free. But you have defeated my attack, only to face another," Drizzt argued. The best position I can hope to attain from the crossdown is an even stance. Yes?
Hey,
Zack prompted,
Soy, how you doing?
not understanding his student's
Just
problem
getting
with
things
that scenario.
shared out and whatnot.
Remember your own lesson, Drizzt shouted. Every move should bring an advantage, you preach to me, but I see no advantage in using a crossdown. You only recite one part of that lesson for your own purpose, Zack scolded, now growing equally angry. Complete the phrase or use it not at all. Every move should bring an advantage or take away a disadvantage. The crossdown defeats the double thrust blow, and your opponent obviously has gained the advantage if he even attempts such a daring offensive maneuver. Returning to an even stance is far preferable at that moment. The parry is wrong, Drizzt said stubbornly. Pick up your blades, Zack growled at him, taking a threatening step forward. Drizzt hesitated, and Zack charged, his swords leading. Drizzt dropped to a crouch, snatched up the scimitars, and rose to meet the assault, while wondering if it was another lesson or a true attack. The weapons master pressed furiously, snapping off cut after cut and backing Drizzt around in circles. Drizzt defended well enough and began to notice an all-too-familiar pattern as Zack's attacks came consistently lower, again forcing the hilts of Drizzt's weapons up and out over the scimitar's
1
blades.
second.
Drizzt understood that Zack meant to prove his point with actions, not words. Seeing the fury on Zack's face, though, Drizzt wasn't certain how far the weapons master would carry his point. If Zack proved correct in his observations, would he strike again to Drizzt's thigh or to his heart? Zack came up and under, and Drizzt stiffened and straightened. Double thrust blow, the weapons master growled, and his swords dived in. Drizzt was ready for him. He executed the cross down, smiling smugly at the ring of metal as his scimitars crossed over the thrusting swords. Drizzt then followed through with only one of his blades, thinking he could deflect both of Zack's swords well enough in that manner. Now, with one blade free of the parry, Drizzt spun it over in a devious counter. As soon as Drizzt reversed the one hand, Zack saw the ploy, a ruse he had suspected Drizzt would try. Zack dropped one of his own sword tips, the one nearest to the hilt of Drizzt's single parrying blade, to the ground, and Drizzt, trying to maintain an even resistance and balance along the length of the blocking scimitar, lost his balance. Drizzt was quick enough to catch himself before he had stumbled too far, though his knuckles pinched into the stone of the floor. He still believed that he had Zack caught in his trap and that he could finish his brilliant counter. He took a short step forward to regain his full balance. The weapons master dropped straight down to the floor under the arc of Drizzt's swinging scimitar and spun a single circuit, driving his booted heel into the back of Drizzt's exposed knee. Before Drizzt had even realized the attack, he found himself lying flat on his back. Zack abruptly broke his own momentum and threw his feet back under him. Before Drizzt could begin to understand the dizzying counter, he found the weapons master standing over him, with the tip of Zack's sword painfully and pointedly drawing a tiny drop of blood from his throat. "Have you anything more to say?" Zack growled. "The parry is wrong," Drizzt answered. Zack's laughter erupted from his belly. He threw his sword to the ground, reached down, and pulled the stubborn young student to his feet. He calmed quickly, his gaze finding that of Drizzt's lavender orbs as he pushed the student out to arm's length. Zack marveled at the ease of Drizzt's stance, the way he held the twin scimitars almost as if they were a natural extension of his arms. Drizzt had been in training only a few months, but already he had mastered the use of nearly every weapon in the vast armory of House Do'Urden. Those scimitars, Drizzt's chosen weapons, with curving blades that enhanced the dizzying flow of the young fighter's sweeping battle style. With those scimitars in hand, this young drow, barely more than a child, could outfight half the members of the academy, and a shiver tingled through Zack's spine when he pondered just how magnificent Drizzt would become after years of training. It was not just the physical abilities and potential of Drizzt Do'Urden that made Zack Nathane pause and take note, however. Zack had come to realize that Drizzt's temperament was indeed different from that of the average drow. Drizzt possessed a spirit of innocence and lacked any maliciousness. Zack couldn't help but feel proud when he looked upon Drizzt. In all manners, the young drow held to the same principles, morals so unusual in Menzo Baranzan, as Zack. Drizzt had recognized the connection as well, though he had no idea of how unique his and Zack's shared perceptions were in the evil drow world. He realized that Uncle Zack was different from any of the other dark elves he had come to know, though that included only his own family and a few dozen of the house soldiers. Certainly Zack was much different from Breeza, Drizd's oldest sister, with her zealous, almost blind ambitions in the mysterious religion of Loth. Certainly Zack was different from Matron Malice, Drizd's mother, who seemed never to say anything at all to Drizzt unless it was a command for service. Zack was able to smile at situations that didn't necessarily bring pain to anyone. He was the first drow Drizzt had met who was apparently content with his station in life. Zack was the first drow Drizzt had ever heard laugh. A good try, the weapons master conceded of Drizd's failed counter. In a real battle, I would have been dead, Drizzt replied. Surely, said Zack, but that is why we train. Your plan was masterful, your timing perfect. Only the situation was wrong. Still, I will say it was a good try. You expected it, said the student. Zack smiled and nodded. That is, perhaps, because I had seen the maneuver attempted by another student. Against you? Drizzt asked, feeling a little less special now that he knew his battle insights were not so unique. Hardly.
Can't
Zack
complain too
replied.
much.
I watched the counter fail from the same angle as you, to the same result. Drizd's face brightened.
Roach
think
joint. I'm
alike.
about to roll another one as soon as I finish this one.
We do, said Zack. But my knowledge has been increased by 4 centuries of experience, while you have not even lived through a score of years. Trust me, my eager student. The cross-down is the correct path. Perhaps, Drizzt replied. Zack hid a smile. When we find a better counter, we shall try. But until then, trust my word. I have trained more soldiers than I can count. All the army of House Do'Urden and 10 times that number when I served as a master in Melee MacVir. I taught Rizet, all of your sisters, and both of your brothers. Both? Zack paused and shot a curious glance at Drizzt. I see, said after a moment. They never bothered to tell you. Zack wondered if it was his place to tell Drizzt the truth. He doubted that Matron Malice would care either way. She probably hadn't told Drizzt simply because she hadn't considered the story of Nalthane's death worth telling. Yes, both, Zack decided to explain. You had 2 brothers when you were born. Dinan, whom you know, and an older one, Nalthane, a wizard of considerable power. Nalthane was killed in battle on the very night you drew your first breath. Against dwarves or vicious gnomes? Drizzt squeaked, as wide-eyed as a child begging for a frightening bedtime story. Was he defending the city from evil conquerors or rogue monsters? Zack had a hard time reconciling the warped perceptions of Drizd's innocent beliefs. There the young lies, he lamented under his breath. But to Drizzt he answered, no. Then against some opponent more foul? Drizzt pressed. Wicked elves from the surface? He died at the hands of a drow. Zack snapped in frustration, stealing the eagerness from Drizd's shining eyes. Drizzt slumped back to consider the possibilities, and Zack could hardly bear to watch the confusion that twisted his young face. War with another city? Drizzt asked somberly. I did not know. Zack let it go at that. He turned and moved silently toward his private chamber. Let Malice or one of her lackeys destroy Drizd's innocent logic. Behind him, Drizzt held his next line of questions in check, understanding that the conversation and the lesson was at an end. Understanding, too, that something important had just transpired. The weapons master battled Drizzt through long hours, as the days blended into 10 days, and the 10 days into months. Time became unimportant. They fought until exhaustion overwhelmed them, and went back to the training floor again as soon as they were able. By the 3rd year, at the age of 19, Drizzt was able to hold out for hours against the weapons master, even taking the offensive in many of their contests. Zack enjoyed these days. For the first time in many years, he had met one with the potential to become his fighting equal. For the first time that Zack could ever remember, laughter often accompanied the clash of adamantine weapons in the training room. He watched Drizzt grow tall and straight, attentive, eager, and intelligent. The masters of the academy would be hard put just to hold a stalemate against Drizzt, even in his first year. That thought thrilled the weapons master only as long as it took him to remember the principles of the academy, the precepts of drow life, and what they would do to his wonderful steel. How they would steal that smile from Drizzt lavender eyes. A pointed reminder of that drow world outside the practice room visited them one day in the person of Matron Malice. Address her with proper respect, Zack warned Drizzt when Maya announced the matron mother's entrance. The weapons master prudently moved out a few steps to greet the head of House Do'Urden privately. My greetings, matron, he said with a low bow. To what do I owe the honor of your presence? Matron Malice laughed at him, seeing through his facade. So much time do you and my son spend in here, she came. I came to witness the benefit to the boy. He is a fine fighter, Zack assured her. He will have to be, Malice muttered. He goes to the academy in only a year. Zack narrowed his eyes at her doubting words and growled. The academy has never seen a finer swordsman. The matron walked away from him to stand before Drizzt. I doubt not your prowess with the blade, she said to Drizzt, though she shot a sly gaze back at Zack as she spoke the words. You have the proper blood. There are other qualities that make up a drow warrior, qualities of the heart, the attitude of a warrior. Drizzt didn't know how to respond to her. He had seen her only a few times in all of the last 3 years, and they had exchanged no words. Zack saw the confusion in Drizzt's face and feared that the boy would slip up, precisely what Matron Malice wanted. Then Malice would have an excuse to pull Drizzt out of Zack's tutelage, dishonoring Zack in the process, and give him over to Dean or some other passionless killer. Zack may have been the finest instructor with the blade, but now that Drizzt had learned the use of weapons, Malice wanted him emotionally hardened. Zack couldn't risk it. He valued his time with young Drizzt too much. He pulled his swords from their jeweled scabbards and charged right by Matron Malice, yelling, Show her, young warrior! Drizzt's eyes became burning flames at the approach of his wild instructor. His scimitars came into his hands as quickly as if he had willed them to appear. It was a good thing they had. Zack came in on Drizzt with a fury that the young drow had never before seen, more so even than the time Zack had shown Drizzt the value of the cross-down parry. Sparks flew as swords rang his scimitar, and Drizzt found himself driven back, both of his arms already aching from the sudden force of the heavy blows. What are you? Show her, Zack growled, slamming in again and again. Drizzt barely dodged one cut that surely would have killed him. Still, confusion kept his moves purely defensive. Zack slapped one of Drizzt's scimitars, then the other, out wide, and used an unexpected weapon, bringing his foot straight up in front of him and slamming his heel into Drizzt's nose. Drizzt heard the crackle of cartilage and felt the warmth of his own blood running freely down his face. He dived back into a roll, trying to keep a safe distance from his crazed opponent until he could realign his senses. From his knees he saw Zack a short distance away and approaching. Show her, Zack growled angrily with every determined step. The purple flames of fairy fire limned Drizzt's skin, making him an easier target. He responded the only way he could. He dropped a globe of darkness over himself and Zack. Sensing the weapons master's next move, Drizzt dropped to his belly and scrambled out, keeping his head low, a wise choice. At his first realization of the darkness, Zack had quickly levitated up about 10 feet and rolled right over, sweeping his blades down to Drizzt's face level. When Drizzt came clear of the other side of the darkened globe, he looked back and saw only the lower half of Zack's legs. He didn't need to watch anything more to understand the weapons master's deadly blind attacks. Zack would have cut him apart if he had not dropped low in the blackness. Anger replaced confusion. When Zack dropped from his magical perch and came rushing back out the front of the globe, Drizzt let his rage lead him back into the fight. He spun a pirouette just before he reached Zack, his lead scimitar cutting a gracefully arcing line, and his other following in a deceptively sharp stab straight over that line. Zack dodged the thrusting point and put a backhand block on the other. Drizzt wasn't finished. He set his thrusting blade into a series of short, wicked pokes that kept Zack on the retreat for a dozen steps and more, back into the conjured darkness. They now had to rely on their incredibly keen sense of hearing and their instincts. Zack finally managed to regain a foothold, but Drizzt immediately set his own feet into action, kicking away whenever the balance of his swinging blades allowed for it. One foot even slipped through Zack's defenses, blasting the breath from the weapons master's lungs. They came back out the side of the globe, and Zack too glowed in the outline of fairy fire. The weapons master felt sickened by the hatred etched on his young student's face, but he realized that this time neither he nor Drizzt had been given a choice in the matter. This fight had to be ugly, had to be real. Gradually, Zack settled into an easy rhythm, solely defensive, and let Drizzt, in his explosive fury, wear himself down. Drizzt played on, relentless and tireless. Zack coaxed him by letting him see openings where there were none, and Drizzt was always quick to oblige, launching a thrust, cut, or kick. Matron Malice watched the spectacle silently. She couldn't deny the measure of training Zack had given her son. Drizzt was, physically, more than ready for battle. Zack knew that, to Matron Malice, sheer skill with weapons might not be enough. Zack had to keep Malice from conversing with Drizzt for any length of time. She would not approve of her son's attitudes. Drizzt was tiring now, Zack could see, though he recognized the weariness in his student's arms to be partly deception. "Go with it," he muttered silently, and he suddenly twisted his ankle, his right arm flailing out wide and low as he struggled for balance, opening a hole in his defenses that Drizzt could not resist. The expected thrust came in a flash, and Zack's left arm streaked in a short crosscut that slapped the scimitar right out of Drizzt's hand. "Ha!" Drizzt called, having expected the move and launching his second ruse. His remaining scimitar knifed over Zack's left shoulder, inevitably dipping in the follow-through of the parry. But by the time Drizzt even launched the second blow, Zack was already down to his knees. As Drizzt's blade cut harmlessly high, Zack sprang to his feet and launched a right cross, hilt first, that caught Drizzt squarely in the face. A stunned Drizzt leaped back a long step and stood perfectly still for a long moment. His remaining scimitar dropped to the ground, and his glossed eyes did not blink. "A feint within a feint within a feint," Zack calmly explained. Drizzt slumped to the floor, unconscious. Matron Malice nodded her approval as Zack walked back over to her. "He is ready for the academy," she remarked. Zack's face turned sour, and he did not answer. "Vienna is already there," Malice continued, "to teach as a mistress in Eric Tynolith, the School of Law. It is a high honor." A laurel for House Do'Urden, Zack knew, but he was smart enough to keep his thoughts silent. "Dinan will leave soon," said the matron. Zack was surprised. 2 children serving as masters in the academy at the same time? "You must have worked hard to get such accommodations," he dared to remark. Matron Malice smiled. "Favors owed, favors called in." "To what end?" asked Zack. "Protection for Drizzt?" Malice laughed aloud. "From what I have just witnessed, Drizzt would more likely protect the other 2. Zack bit his lip at the comment. Dinan was still twice the fighter, and 10 times the heartless killer as Drizzt. Zack knew that Malice had other motives. 3 of the first 8 houses will be represented by no fewer than 4 children in the academy over the next 2 decades, Matron Malice admitted. Matron Baenri's own son will begin in the same class as Drizzt. "So you have aspirations," Zack said. "How high, then, will House Do'Urden climb under the guidance of Matron Malice?" "Sarcasm will cost you your tongue," the matron mother warned. "We would be fools to let slip by such an opportunity to learn more of our rivals." "The first 8 houses," Zack mused. "Be cautious, Matron Malice. Do not forget to watch for rivals among the lesser houses. There once was a house named De Vere that made such a mistake." "No attack will come from behind," Malice sneered. "We are the 9th house, but boast more power than but a handful of others. None will strike at our backs. There are easier targets higher up the line." "And all to our gain," Zack put in. "That is the point of it all, is it not?" Malice asked, her evil smile wide on her face. Zack didn't need to respond. The matron knew his true feelings. That precisely was not the point. "Speak less, and your jaw will heal faster," Zack said later, when he again was alone with Drizzt. Drizzt cast him a vile glance. The weapons master shook his head. "We have become great friends," he said. So I had thought, mumbled Drizzt. And think clearly, Zack scolded. Do you believe that Matron Malice would approve of such a bonding between her weapons master and her youngest, and her prized youngest son? You are a drow, Drizzt Do'Urden, and of noble birth. You may have no friends. Drizzt straightened, as if he had been slapped in the face. None openly, at least, Zack conceded, laying a comforting hand on the youngster's shoulder. Friends equate to vulnerability, inexcusable vulnerability. Matron Malice would never accept it. He paused, realizing that he was browbeating his student. Well, he admitted in quiet conclusion. At least we two know who we are. Somehow, to Drizzt, that just didn't seem enough. 9. Families. Come quickly, Zack instructed Drizzt one evening after they had finished their sparring. By the urgency of the weapons master's tone, and by the fact that Zack didn't even pause to wait for Drizzt knew that something important was happening. He finally caught up to Zack on the balcony of House Do'Urden, where Maya and Briza already stood. What is it? Drizzt asked. Zack pulled him close and pointed out across the great cavern to the northeastern reaches of the city. Lights flashed and
I'll be
faded
right
in
back.
sudden bursts. A pillar of fire rose into the air, then disappeared. A raid, Briza said offhandedly. Minor houses, and of no concern to us. Zack saw that Drizzt did not understand. One house has attacked another, he explained. Revenge, perhaps, but most likely an attempt to climb to a higher rank in the city. The battle has been long, Briza remarked, and still the lights flash. Zack continued to clarify the event for the confused second boy of the house. The attackers should have blocked the battle within rings of darkness. Their inability to do so might indicate that the defending house was ready for the raid. All cannot be going well for the attackers, Maya agreed. Drizzt could hardly believe what he was hearing. Even more alarming than the news itself was the way his family talked about the event. They were so calm in their descriptions, as if this was an expected occurrence. The attackers must leave no witnesses, Zack explained to Drizzt, else they will face the wrath of the ruling council. But we are witnesses, Drizzt reasoned. No, Zack replied. We are onlookers. This battle is none of our affair. Only the nobles of the defending house are awarded the right to place accusations against their attackers. If any nobles are left alive, Briza added, obviously enjoying the drama. At that moment, Drizzt wasn't sure if he liked this new revelation. However he might have felt, he found that he could not tear his gaze from the continuing spectacle of drow battle. All the Do'Urden compound was astir now, soldiers and slaves running about in search of a better vantage point, and shouting out descriptions of the action and rumors of the perpetrators. This was drow society in all its macabre play, and while it seemed ultimately wrong in the heart of the youngest member of House Do'Urden, Drizzt could not deny the excitement of the night. Nor could Drizzt deny the expressions of obvious pleasure stamped upon the faces of the three who shared the balcony with him. Alton made his way through his private chambers one final time, to make certain that any artifacts or tomes that might seem even the least bit sacrilegious were safely hidden. He was expecting a visit from a matron mother, a rare occasion for a master of the academy not connected with Eric Tynolith, the School of Loth. Alton was more than a little anxious about the motives of this particular visitor. Matron Sinafed Hunnet, head of the city's 5th house and mother of Massage, Alton's partner in conspiracy. A bang on the stone door of the outermost chamber in his complex told Alton that his guest had arrived. He straightened his robes and took yet another glance around the room. The door swung open before Alton could get there, and Matron Sinafed swept into the room. How easily she made the transformation, walking from the absolute dark of the outside corridor into the candlelight of Alton's chamber without so much as a flinch. Sinafed was smaller than Alton had imagined, diminutive even by the standards of the drow. She stood barely more than 4 feet high and weighed By Alton's estimation, no more than 50 pounds. She was a matron mother, though, and Alton reminded himself that she could strike him dead with a single spell. Alton averted his gaze obediently and tried to convince himself that there was nothing unusual about this visit. He grew less at ease, however, when Massage trotted in and to his mother's side, a smug smile on his face. "Greetings from House Hunnet, Gel Rose," Matron Sinafe said. "25 years and more it has been since we last talked." "Gel Rose," Alton mumbled under his breath. He cleared his throat to cover his surprise. "My greetings to you, Matron Sinafe," he managed to stammer. "Has it been so very long?" "You should come to the house," the matron said. "Your chambers remain empty." My chambers? Alton began to feel very sick. Sinafe did not miss the look. A scowl crossed her face, and her eyes narrowed evilly. Alton suspected that his secret was out. If the Faceless One had been a member of the Hunnet family, how could Alton hope to fool the matron mother of the house? He scanned for the best escape route, or for some way he could at least kill the traitorous Massage before Sinafe struck him down. When he looked back toward Matron Sinafe, she had already begun a quiet spell. Her eyes popped wide at its completion, her suspicions confirmed. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice sounding more curious than concerned. There was no escape, no way to get at Massage, standing prudently close to his powerful mother's side. "Who are you?" Sinafe asked again, taking a 3-headed instrument from her belt, the dreaded snake-headed whip that injected the most painful and incapacitating poison known to drow. "Alton," he stuttered, having no choice but to answer. He knew that since she now was on her guard, Sinafe would use simple magic to detect any lies he might concoct. "I am Alton DeVere." "DeVere?" Matron Sinafe appeared at least intrigued. "Of the House DeVere that died some years ago?" "I am the only survivor," Alton admitted. "And you killed Gel Rose Hunnet, and took his place as master and sorcerer," the matron reasoned, her voice a snarl. Doom closed in all around Alton. I could not know his name. He would have killed me," Alton stuttered. "I killed Gel Rose," came a voice from the side. Sinafe and Alton turned to Massage, who once again held his favorite 2-handed crossbow. "With this," the young Hunnet explained, "on the night House DeVere fell, I found my excuse in Gel Rose's battle with that one," he pointed to Alton. "Gel Rose was your brother," Matron Sinafe reminded Massage. "Damn his bones," Massage spat. "For 4 miserable years I served him as if he were a matron mother. He would have kept me from Sorcerer, would have forced me into the Melee MacVir instead." The matron looked from Massage to Alton and back to her son. "And you let this one live," she wheezed, a smile again on her lips. "You killed your enemy and forged an alliance with a new master in a single move." "As I was taught," Massage said through clenched teeth, not knowing whether punishment or praise would follow. "You were just a child," Sinafe remarked, suddenly realizing the timetable involved. Massage accepted the compliment silently. Alton watched it all anxiously. "Then what of me?" he cried. "Is my life forfeit?" Sinafe turned a glare on him. "Your life as Alton DeVere ended, so it would seem, on the night House DeVere fell. Thus you remain the Faceless One, Gel Rose Hunnet. I can use your eyes in the academy to watch over my son and my enemies." Alton could hardly
Hell
believe
yeah.
to so
Yeah, another
suddenly
one
find
rolled up.
himself allied with one of the most powerful houses in Menzo Baranzon. A jumble of possibilities and questions flooded his mind, one in particular, which had haunted him for nearly 2 decades. His adopted matron mother recognized his excitement. "Speak your thoughts," she commanded. "You are a high priestess of love," Alton said boldly, that one notion overpowering all caution. It is within your power to grant me my fondest desire. You dare to ask a favor? Matron Sinafe bawled, though she saw the torment on Alton's face and was intrigued by the apparent importance of this mystery. Very well. What house destroyed my family? Alton growled. Ask the netherworld, I beg, Matron Sinafe. Sinafe considered the question carefully, and the possibilities of Alton's apparent thirst for vengeance. Another benefit of allowing this one into the family, Sinafe wondered. This is known to me already, she replied. Perhaps when you have proven your value, I will tell. No, Alton cried. He stopped short, realizing that he had interrupted a matron mother, a crime that could invoke a punishment of death. Sinafe held back her angry urges. This question must be very important for you to act so foolishly, she said. Please, Alton begged. I must know. Kill me if you will, but tell me first who it was. Sinafe liked his courage, and his obsession could only prove of value to her. House Do'Urden, she said. Do'Urden, Alton echoed, hardly believing that a house so far back in the city hierarchy could have defeated House de Vere. You will take no actions against them, Matron Sinafe ruled. And I will forgive your insolence this time. You are a son of House Hunnet now. Remember always your place. She let it stare back, knowing that one who had been clever enough to carry out such a deception for the better part of 2 decades would not be foolish enough to disobey the matron mother of his house. Come, Massage, Sinafe said to her son. Let us leave this one alone, so that he may consider his new identity. I must tell you, Matron Sinafe, Massage dared to say as he and his mother made their way out of Sorcerre. Alton de Vere is a buffoon. He might bring harm to House Hunnet. He survived the fall of his own house, Sinafe replied, and has played through the rules as the Faceless One for 19 years. A buffoon? Perhaps, but a resourceful buffoon at the least. Massage unconsciously rubbed the area of his eyes that had never grown back. I have suffered the antics of Alton de Vere for all these years, he said. He does have a fair share of luck, I admit, and can get himself out of trouble, though he is usually the one who puts himself into it. Do not fear, Sinafe laughed. Alton brings value to our house. What can we hope to gain? He is a master of the academy, Sinafe replied. He gives me eyes where I now need them. She stopped her son and turned him to face her so that he might understand the implications of her every word. Alton de Vere's claim against House Do'Urden may work in our favor. He was a noble of the house with rights of accusation. You mean to use Alton de Vere's charge to rally the great houses into punishing House Do'Urden? Massage asked. The great houses would hardly be willing to strike out for an incident that occurred almost 20 years ago, Sinafe replied. House Do'Urden executed House de Vere's destruction nearly to perfection, a clean kill. To so much as speak an open charge against the Do'Urdens now would be to invite the wrath of the great houses on ourselves. What good then is Alton de Vere? Massage asked. His claim is useless to us. The matron replied. You are only a male, and cannot understand the complexities of the ruling hierarchy. With Alton de Vere's charge whispered into the proper ears, the ruling council might look the other way if a single house took revenge on Alton's behalf. To what end? Massage remarked, not understanding the importance. You would risk the losses of such a battle for the destruction of a lesser house? So thought House de Vere of House Do'Urden, explained Sinafe. In our world, we must be as concerned with the lower houses as with the higher ones. All of the great houses would be wise now to watch closely the moves of Daermon and Ashesbernon, the 9th house that is known as Do'Urden. It now has both a master and a mistress serving in the academy, and 3 high priestesses, with a 4th nearing the goal. 4 high priestesses? Massage pondered. In a single house. Only 3 of the top 8 houses could claim more than that. Normally, Sisters aspiring to such heights inspired rivalries that inevitably thinned the ranks. And the legions of House Do'Urden number more than 350, Sina Fey continued, all of them trained by perhaps the finest weapons master in all the city. Zack the Fane Do'Urden, of course, Massage recalled. You have heard of him? His name is often spoken at the academy, even in Sorcerer. Good, Sina Fey purred. Then you will understand the full weight of the mission I have chosen for you. An eager light came into Massage's eyes. Another Do'Urden is soon to begin there, Sina Fey explained. Not a master, but a student. By the words of those few who have seen this boy, Drizzt, at training, he will be as fine a fighter as Zack the Fane. We should not allow this. You want me to kill the boy? Massage asked eagerly. No, Sina Fey replied, not him. I want you to learn of him, to understand the motivations of his every move. If the time to strike does come, you must be ready. Massage liked the devious assignment, but one thing still bothered him more than a little. We still have Alton to consider, he said. He is impatient and daring. What are the consequences to House Hunnet if he strikes House Do'Urden before the proper time? Might we invoke open war in the city, with House Hunnet viewed as the perpetrator? Do not worry, my son, Matron Sina Fey replied. If Alton Devere makes a grievous error, while in the guise of Gelrose Hunnet, we expose him as a murderous impostor and no member of our family. He will be an unhoused rogue, with an executioner facing him from every direction. Her casual explanation put Massage at ease, but Matron Sina Fey, so knowledgeable in the ways of Drow society, had understood the risk she was taking from the moment she had accepted Alton Devere into her house. Her plan seemed foolproof, and the possible gain, the elimination of this growing House Do'Urden, was a tempting piece of bait. But the dangers, too, were very real. While it was perfectly acceptable for one house to covertly destroy another, the consequences of failure could not be ignored. Earlier that very night, a lesser house had struck out against a rival and, if the rumors held true, had failed. The illuminations of the next day would probably force the ruling council to enact a pretense of justice, to make an example of the unsuccessful attackers. In her long life,
I'll be right
Matron
back.
Sina Fey had witnessed this justice several times. Not a single member of any of the aggressor houses, she was not even allowed to remember their names, had ever survived. Zack awakened Drizzt early the next morning. Come, he said. We are bid to go out of the house this day. All thoughts of sleep washed away from Drizzt at the news. Outside the house? He echoed. In all of his 19 years, Drizzt had never once walked beyond the adamantine fence of the Do'Urden complex. He had only watched that outside world of Menzoberranzan from a balcony. While Zack waited, Drizzt quickly collected his soft boots and his Puafwi. Will there be no lesson this day? Drizzt asked. We shall see, was all that Zack replied, but in his thoughts, the weapons master figured that Drizzt might be in for one of the most startling revelations of his life. A house had failed in a raid, and the ruling council had requested the presence of all the nobles of the city to bear witness to the weight of justice. Briza appeared in the corridor outside the practice room's door. Hurry, she scolded. Matron Malice does not wish our house to be among the last groups joining the gathering. The matron mother herself, floating atop a blue glowing disc, for matron mothers rarely walked through the city, led the procession out of House Do'Urden's grand gate. Briza walked at her mother's side, with Maya and Risen in the second rank, and Drizzt and Zack taking up the rear. Bierna and Dina, attending to the duties of their positions in the academy, had gone to the ruling council's summons with a different group. All the city was astir this morning, rumbling in the rumors of the failed raid. Drizzt walked through the bustle wide-eyed, staring in wonderment at the close-up view of the decorated drow houses. Slaves of every inferior race, goblins, orcs, even giants, scrambled out of the way, recognizing Malice, riding her enchanted carriage as a matron mother. Drow commoners halted conversations and remained respectfully silent as the noble family passed. As they made their way toward the northwestern section, the location of the guilty house, they came into a lane blocked by a squabbling caravan of Duergar, gray dwarves. A dozen carts had been overturned or locked together. Apparently, two groups of Duergar had come into the narrow lane together, neither relinquishing the right of way. Brisa pulled the snake-headed whip from her belt and chased off a few of the creatures, clearing the way for Malice to float up to the apparent leaders of the two groups. The dwarves turned on her angrily until they realized her station. "Begging your pardon, madam," one of them stammered. "Unfortunate accident is all." Malice eyed the contents of one of the nearest carts, crates of giant crab legs and other delicacies. "You have slowed my journey," Malice said calmly. "We have come to your city in hopes of trade," the other Duergar explained. He cast an angry glare at his counterpart, and Malice understood that the two were rivals, probably bartering the same goods to the same drow house. "I will forgive your insolence," she offered graciously, still eyeing the crates. The two Duergar suspected what was forthcoming. So did Zack. "We eat well tonight," he whispered to Drizzt with a sly wink. Matron Malice would not let such an opportunity slip by without gain. "If you can see your way to deliver half of these carts to the gate of House Do'Urden this night," Malice finished. The Duergar started to protest, but quickly dismissed the foolish notion. How they hated dealing with drow elves. "You will be compensated appropriately," Malice continued. "House Do'Urden is not a poor house. Between both of your caravans, you will still have enough goods to satisfy the house you came to see." Neither of the Duergar could refute the simple logic, but under these trading circumstances, where they had offended a matron mother, they knew the compensation for their valuable foods would hardly be appropriate. Still, the Grey Dwarves could only accept it all as a risk of doing business in Menzoberranzan. They bowed politely and set their troops to clearing the way for the drow procession. House Tikan Dweez, the unsuccessful raiders of the previous night, had barricaded themselves within their two-stalagmite structure, fully expecting what was to come. Outside their gates, all of the nobles of Menzoberranzan, more than 1,000 drow, had gathered, with Matron Baenri and the other 7 matron mothers of the ruling council at their head. More disastrous for the guilty house, the entirety of the 3 schools of the academy, students and instructors, had surrounded the Tikan Dweez compound. Matron Malice led her group to the front line behind the ruling matrons. As she was matron of the 9th house, only one step from the council, other drow nobles readily stepped out of her way. "House Tikan Dweez has angered the Spider Queen," Matron Baenri proclaimed, in a voice amplified by magical spells. "Only because they failed," Zack whispered to Drizzt. Brisa cast both males an angry glare. Matron Baenri bade 3 young drow, 2 females and a male, to her side. "These are all that remains of House Freth," she explained. "Can you tell us, orphans of House Freth," she asked of them, "who it was that attacked your home?" "House Tikan Dweez," they shouted together. "Rehearsed," Zack commented. Brisa turned around again. "Silence," she whispered harshly. Zack slapped Drizzt on the back of the head. "Yes," he agreed. "Do be quiet." Drizzt started to protest, but Brisa had already turned away, and Zack's smile was too wide to argue against. "Then it is the will of the ruling council," Matron Baenri was saying. "But House Tikan Dweez suffer the consequences of their actions." "What of the orphans of House Freth?" came a call from the crowd. Matron Baenri stroked the head of the oldest female, a cleric recently finished in her studies at the academy. "Nobles they were born, and nobles they remain," Baenri said. "House Baenri accepts them into its protection. They bear the name of Baenri now." Disgruntled whispers filtered through the gathering. 3 young nobles, 2 of them female, was quite a prize. Any house in the city gladly would have taken them in. "Baenri," Brisa whispered to Malice. "Just what the first house needs, more clerics." 16 high priestesses is not enough, it seems," Malice answered. And no doubt, Bayenri will take any surviving soldiers of House Freth, Breeza reasoned. Malice was not so certain. Matron Bayenri was walking a thin line by taking even the surviving nobles. If House Bayenri got too powerful, Lolth surely would take exception. In situations such as this, where a house had been almost eradicated, surviving common soldiers were normally pooled out to bidding houses. Malice would have to watch for such an auction. Soldiers did not come cheaply, but at this time, Malice would welcome the opportunity to add to her forces, particularly if there were any magic users to be had. Matron Bayenri addressed the guilty house. "House Tikenduis," she called. "You have broken our laws and have been rightfully caught. Fight if you will, but know that you have brought this doom upon yourself." With a wave of her hand, she set the academy, the dispatcher of justice, into motion. Great braziers had been placed in 8 positions around House Tikenduis, attended by mistresses of Eric Tinolith and the highest-ranking clerical students. Flames roared to life and shot into the air as the high priestesses opened gates to the lower planes. Drizzt watched closely, mesmerized and hoping to catch a glimpse of either Dinan or Vierna. Denizens of the lower plains, huge, many-armed monsters, slime-covered and spitting fire, stepped through the flames. Even the nearest high priestesses backed away from the grotesque horde. The creatures gladly accepted such servitude. When the signal from Matron Bayenri came, they eagerly descended upon House Tikenduis. Glyphs and wards exploded at every corner of the house's feeble gate, but these were mere inconveniences to the summoned creatures. The wizards and students of Sorcerer then went into action, slamming at the top of House Tikenduis with conjured lightning bolts, balls of acid, and fireballs. Students and masters of Melee Magvir, the school of fighters, rushed about with heavy crossbows, firing into windows where the doomed family might try to escape. The horde of monsters bashed through the doors, lightning flashed and thunder boomed. Zack looked at Drizzt, and a frown replaced the master's smile. Caught up in the excitement, and it certainly was exciting, Drizzt bore an expression of awe. The first screams of the doomed family rolled out from the house, screams so terrible and agonized that they stole any macabre pleasure that Drizzt might have been experiencing. He grabbed Zack's shoulder, spinning the weapons master to him, begging for an explanation. One of the sons of House Tikenduis, fleeing a 10-armed giant monster, stepped out onto the balcony of a high window. A dozen crossbow quarrels struck him simultaneously, and before he even fell dead, 3 separate lightning bolts alternately lifted him from the balcony, then dropped him back onto it. Scorched and mutilated, the drow corpse started to tumble from its high perch, but the grotesque monster reached out a huge, clawed hand from the window and pulled it back in to devour it. "Drow justice," Zack said coldly. He didn't offer Drizzt any consolation. He wanted the brutality of this moment to stick in the young drow's mind for the rest of his life. The siege went on for more than an hour, and when it was finished, when the denizens of the lower plains were dismissed through the Brazier's gates, and the students and instructors of the academy started their march back to Tir Bresh, House Tikenduis was no more than a glowing lump of lifeless, molten stone. Drizzt watched it all, horrified, but too afraid of the consequences to run away. He did not notice the artistry of Menzo Berenzon on the return trip to House Do'Urden. 10. Stained blood. "Zaknafein is out of the house?" Malice asked. "I sent him and Risen to the academy to deliver a message to Vierna," Breeza explained. "He shan't return for many hours, not before the light of Narbondale begins its descent." "That is good," said Malice. "You both understand your duties in this farce." Breeza and Maya nodded. "I have never heard of such a deception," Maya remarked. "Is it necessary?" "It was planned for another of the house," Breeza answered, looking to Matron Malice for confirmation. "Nearly 4 centuries ago." "Yes," agreed Malice. "The same was to be done to Zaknafein, but the unexpected death of Matron Vortha, my mother, disrupted the plans. That was when you became the matron mother, Maya said. Yes, replied Malus, though I had not passed my first century of life and was still training in Erech Tinnerith. It was not a pleasant time in the history of House Do'Urden. But we survived, said Breeza. With the death of Matron Vartha, now Thane and I became nobles of the house. The test on Zacnathane was never attempted, Maya reasoned. Too many other duties preceded it, Malus answered. We will try it on Drizzt, though, said Maya. The punishment of House Tikanduis convinced me that this action had to be taken, said Malus. Yes, Breeza agreed. Did you notice Drizzt's expression throughout the execution? I did, answered Maya. He was revolted. Unfitting for a drow warrior, said Malus. And so this duty is upon us. Drizzt will leave for the academy in a short time. We must stain his hands with drow blood and steal his innocence. It seems a lot of trouble for a male child, Breeza grumbled. If Drizzt cannot adhere to our ways, then why do we not simply give him to Loth? I will bear no more children, Malus growled in response. Every member of his family is important if we are to gain prominence in the city. Secretly, Malus hoped for another gain in converting Drizzt to the evil ways of the drow. She hated Zacnathane as much as she desired him, and turning Drizzt into a drow warrior, a true, heartless drow warrior, would distress the weapons master greatly. On with it then, Malus proclaimed. She clapped her hands, and a large chest walked in, supported by 8 animated spider legs. Behind it came a nervous goblin slave. Come, Buchuch, Malus said in a comforting tone. Anxious to please, the slave bounded up before Malus's throne and held perfectly still as the matron mother went through the incantation of a long and complicated spell. Breeza and Maya watched in admiration at their mother's skills. The little goblin's features bulged and twisted, and its skin darkened. A few minutes later, the slave had assumed the appearance of a male drow. Buchuch looked at its features happily, not understanding that the transformation was merely a prelude to death. You are a drow soldier now, Maya said to it, and my champion. You must kill only a single, inferior fighter to take your place as a free commoner of House Do'Urden. After 10 years as an indentured servant to the wicked Dark Elves, the goblin was more than eager. Malus rose and started out of the anteroom. Come, she ordered, and her 2 daughters, the goblin and the animated chest, fell in line behind her. They came upon Drizzt in the practice room, polishing the razor edge of his scimitars. He leaped straight up to silent attention at the sight of the unexpected visitors. Greetings, my son, Malus said, in a tone more motherly than Drizzt had ever heard. We have a test for you this day, a simple task necessary for your acceptance into Melee Macvir. Maya moved before her brother. I am the youngest beside yourself, she declared. Thus I am granted the rights of challenge, which I now execute. Drizzt stood confused. He had never heard of such a thing. Maya called the chest to her side and reverently opened the cover. You have your weapons and your coiffury, she explained. Now it is time for you to don the complete outfit of a noble of House Do'Urden. From the chest, she pulled out a pair of high black boots and handed them to Drizzt. Drizzt eagerly slipped out of his normal boots and put on the new ones. They were incredibly soft, and they magically shifted and adjusted to a perfect fit on his feet. Drizzt knew the magic within them. They would allow him to move in absolute silence. Before he had even finished admiring them, though, Maya gave him the next gift, even more magnificent. Drizzt dropped his coiffury to the floor as he took a set of silvery chain mail. In all the realms, there was no armor as supple and finely crafted as drow chain mail. It weighed no more than a heavy shirt, and would bend as easily as silken cloth, yet could deflect the tip of a spear as surely as dwarven-crafted plate mail. You fight with 2 weapons, Maya said, and therefore need no shield. But put your scimitars in this. It is more fitting to a drow noble. She handed Drizzt a black leather belt, its clasp a huge emerald, and its two scabbards richly decorated in jewels and gemstones. "Prepare yourself," Malice said to Drizzt. "The gifts must be earned." As Drizzt started to don the outfit, Malice moved beside the altered goblin, which stood nervously in the growing realization that its fight would be no simple task. "When you kill him, the items will be yours," Malice promised. The goblin's smile returned tenfold. It could not comprehend that it had no chance against Drizzt. When Drizzt again fastened his Pawafwe around his neck, Maya introduced the phony drow soldier. "This is Buchuch," she said, "my champion. You must defeat him to earn the gifts, and your proper place in the family." Never doubting his abilities, and thinking the contest to be a simple sparring match, Drizzt readily agreed. "Let it begin then," he said, drawing his scimitars from their lavish sheaths. Malice gave Buchuch a comforting nod, and the goblin took up the sword and shield that Maya had provided and moved right in at Drizzt. Drizzt began slowly, trying to take a measure of his opponent before attempting any daring offensive strikes. In only a moment, though, Drizzt realized how badly Buchuch handled the sword and shield. Not knowing the truth of the creature's identity, Drizzt could hardly believe that a drow would show such ineptitude with weapons. He wondered if Buchuch was baiting him, and with that thought continued his cautious approach. After a few more moments of Buchuch's wild and off-balance swings, however, Drizzt felt compelled to take the initiative. He slapped one scimitar against Buchuch's shield. The goblin drow responded with a lumbering thrust, and Drizzt slapped its sword from its hand with his free blade and executed a simple twist that brought the scimitar's tip to a halt against the hollow of Buchuch's chest. "Too easy," Drizzt muttered under his breath. But the true test had only begun. On cue, Breeza cast a mind-numbing spell on the goblin, freezing it in its helpless position. Still aware of its predicament, Buchuch tried to dive away, but Breeza's spell held it still. "Finish the strike," Malice said to Drizzt. Drizzt looked at his scimitar, then to Malice, unable to believe what he was hearing. "Maya's champion must be killed," Breeza snarled. "I cannot," Drizzt began. "Kill," Malice roared, and this time the word carried the weight of a magical command. "Thrust," Breeza likewise commanded. Drizzt felt their words compelling his hand to action. Thoroughly disgusted with the thought of murdering a helpless foe, he concentrated with all of his mental strength to resist. While he managed to deny the commands for a few seconds, Drizzt found that he could not pull the weapon away. "Kill!" Malice screamed. "Strike!" yelled Breeza. It went on for several more agonizing seconds. Sweat beaded on Drizzt's brow. Then the young drow's willpower broke. His scimitar slipped quickly between Buchuch's ribs and found the unfortunate creature's heart. Breeza released Buchuch from her holding spell then, to let Drizzt see the agony on the phony drow's face and hear the gurgles as the dying Buchuch slipped to the floor. Drizzt could not find his breath as he stared at his blood-stained weapon. It was Maya's turn to act. She clipped Drizzt on the shoulder with her mace, knocking him to the floor. "You killed my champion," she growled. "Now you must fight me." Drizzt rolled back to his feet, away from the enraged female. He had no intention of fighting, but before he could even drop his weapons, Malice read his thoughts and warned. "If you do not fight, Maya will kill you." "This is not the way," Drizzt protested, but his words were lost in the ring of adamantine as he parried a heavy blow with one scimitar. He was now into it, whether he liked it or not. Maya was a skilled fighter. All females spent many hours training with weapons, and she was stronger than Drizzt. But Drizzt was Zack's son, the prime student, and when he admitted to himself that he had no way out of this predicament, he came in at Maya's mace and shield with every cunning maneuver he had been taught.
Chopping this part off.
Scimitars weaved and dipped in a dance that awed Breeza and Maya. Malice hardly noticed, caught in the midst of yet another mighty spell. Malice never doubted that Drizzt could defeat his sister, and she had incorporated her expectations into the plan. Drizzt's moves were all defensive, as he continued to hope for some semblance of sanity to come over his mother, and that this whole thing would be stopped. He wanted to back Maya up, cause her to stumble, and end the fighting by putting her in a helpless position. Drizzt had to believe that Briza and Malice would not compel him to kill Maya as he had killed Buchuch. Finally, Maya did slip. She threw her shield out to deflect an arcing scimitar, but became overbalanced in the block, and her arm went wide. Drizzt's other blade knifed in, only to nick at Maya's breast and force her back. Malice's spell caught the weapon in mid-thrust. The blood-stained adamantine blade writhed to life, and Drizzt found himself holding the tail of a serpent, a fanged viper that turned back against him. The enchanted snake spat its venom in Drizzt's eyes, blinding him. Then he felt the pain of Briza's whip. All 6 snakeheads of the awful weapon bit into Drizzt's back, tearing through his new armor and jolting him in excruciating pain. He crumbled down into a curled position, helpless, as Briza snapped the whip in again and again. "Never strike at a drow female!" she screamed as she beat Drizzt into unconsciousness. An hour later, Drizzt opened his eyes. He was in his bed, Matron Malice standing over him. The high priestesses had tended to his wounds, but the sting remained, a vivid reminder of the lesson. But it was not nearly as vivid as the blood that still stained Drizzt's scimitar. "The armor will be replaced," Malice said to him. "You are a drow warrior now. You have earned it." She turned and walked out of the room, leaving Drizzt to his pain and his fallen innocence. "Do not send him," Zack argued as emphatically as he dared. He stared up at Matron Malice, the smug queen on her high throne of stone and black velvet. As always, Briza and Maya stood obediently by her sides. "He is a drow fighter," Malice replied, her tone still controlled. "He must go to the academy. It is our way." Zack looked around helplessly. He hated this place. The chapel anteroom, with its sculptures of the Spider Queen leering down at him from every angle, and with Malice sitting, towering above him from her seat of power. Zack shook the images away and regained his courage, reminding himself that this time he had something worth arguing about. "Do not send him," he growled. "They will ruin him." Matron Malice's hands clenched down on the rock arms of her great chair. "Already Drizzt is more skilled than half of those in the academy," Zack continued quickly, before the matron's anger burst forth. "Allow me 2 more years, and I will make him the finest swordsman in all of Menzoberranzan." Malice eased back on her seat. From what she had seen of her son's progress, she could not deny the possibilities of Zack's claim. "He goes," she said calmly. "There is more to the making of a drow warrior than skill with weapons. Drizzt has other lessons he must learn." "Lessons of treachery?" Zack spat, too angry to care about the consequences. Drizzt had told him what Malice and her evil daughters had done that day, and Zack was wise enough to understand their actions. Their lesson had nearly broken the boy, and had perhaps forever stolen from Drizzt the ideals he held so dear. Drizzt would find his morals and principles harder to cling to, now that the pedestal of purity had been knocked out from under him. "Watch your tongue, Zaknafein," Matron Malice warned. "I fight with passion," the weapons master snapped. "That is why I win. Your son too fights with passion. Do not let the conforming ways of the academy take that from him." "Leave us," Malice instructed her daughters. Maya bowed and rushed out through the door. Briza followed more slowly, pausing to cast a suspicious eye upon Zack. Zack didn't return the glare, but he entertained a fantasy concerning his sword and Briza's smug smile. "Zaknafein," Malice began, again coming forward in her chair. "I have tolerated your blasphemous beliefs through these many years because of your skill with weapons. You have taught my soldiers well, and your love of killing drow, particularly clerics of the Spider Queen, has aided the ascent of House Do'Urden. I am not, and have not been, ungrateful. But I warn you one final time that Drizzt is my son, not his sire's. He will go to the academy and learn what he must to take his place as a prince of House Do'Urden. If you interfere with what must be Zaknafein, I will no longer turn my eyes from your actions. Your heart will be given to Lolth." Zack stamped his heels on the floor. and snapped a short bow of his head, then spun about and departed, trying to find some option in this dark and hopeless picture. As he made his way through the main corridor, he again heard in his mind the screams of the dying children of House de Vere, children who never got the chance to witness the evils of the Drow Academy. Perhaps they were better off dead. 11. Grim Preference.
There's another one down.
Zack slid one of his swords from its scabbard and admired the weapon's wondrous detail.
There we go.
This sword,
This
as with
one.
most of the Drow weapons, had been forged by the Grey Dwarves, then traded to Menzo Baranzan. The Duergar workmanship was exquisite, but it was the work done on the weapon after the Dark Elves had acquired it that made it so very special. None of the races of the surface or Underdark could outdo the Dark Elves in the art of enchanting weapons. Imbued with the strange emanations of the Underdark, the magical power unique to the lightless world, and blessed by the unholy clerics of Loth, no blade ever sat in a wielder's hand more ready to kill. Other races, mostly dwarves and surface elves, also took pride in their crafted weapons. Fine swords and mighty hammers hung over mantels as showpieces, always with a bard nearby to spout the accompanying legend that most often began, "In the days of yore." Drow weapons were different, never showpieces. They were locked in the necessities of the present, never in reminiscences, and their purpose remained unchanged for as long as they held an edge fine enough for battle, fine enough to kill. Zack brought the blade up before his eyes. In his hands, the sword had become more than an instrument of battle. It was an extension of his rage, his answer to an existence he could not accept. It was his answer, too, perhaps, to another problem that seemed to have no resolution. He walked into the training hall, where Drizzt was hard at work spinning attack
Right.
routines against a practice dummy. Zack paused to watch the young Drow at practice, wondering if Drizzt would ever again consider the dance of weapons a form of play. How the scimitars flowed in Drizzt's hands. Interweaving with uncanny precision, each blade seemed to anticipate the other's moves and whirred about in perfect complement. This young Drow might soon be an unrivaled fighter, a master beyond Zack Nathane himself. Can you survive? Zack whispered. Having the heart of a Drow warrior. Zack hoped that the answer would be an emphatic no. But either way, Drizzt was surely doomed. Zack looked down at his sword and knew what he must do. He slid its sister blade from its sheath and started a determined walk toward Drizzt. Drizzt saw him coming and turned at the ready. "A final fight before I leave for the academy?" he laughed. Zack paused to take note of Drizzt's smile. A facade? Or had the young Drow really forgiven himself for his actions against Maya's champion? It did not matter, Zack reminded himself. Even if Drizzt had recovered from his mother's torments, the academy would destroy him. The weapons master said nothing. He just came on, in a flurry of cuts and stabs that put Drizzt immediately on the defensive. Drizzt took it in stride, not yet realizing that this final encounter with his mentor was much more than their customary sparring. "I will remember everything you taught me," Drizzt promised, dodging a cut and launching a fierce counter of his own. "I will carve my name in the halls of Melee MacVeer and make you proud." The scowl on Zack's face surprised Drizzt, and the young Drow grew even more surprised when the weapons master's next attack sent a sword knifing straight at his heart. Drizzt leaped aside, slapping at the blade in sheer desperation, and narrowly avoided impalement. "Are you so very sure of yourself?" Zack growled, stubbornly pursuing Drizzt. Drizzt set himself as their blades met in ringing fury. "I am a fighter," he declared, "a Drow warrior." "You are a dancer," Zack shot back in a derisive tone. He slammed his sword onto Drizzt's blocking scimitar so savagely that the young Drow's arm tingled. "An impostor," Zack cried. "A pretender to a title you cannot begin to understand." Drizzt went on the offensive. Fire burned in his lavender eyes, and new strength guided his scimitar's sure cuts. But Zack was relentless. He fended the attacks and continued his lesson. "You know the emotions of murder?" he snapped. "Have you reconciled yourself to the act you committed?" Drizzt only answers were a frustrated growl and a renewed attack. "Ah, the pleasure of plunging your sword into the bosom of a high priestess," Zack taunted. "To see the light of warmth leave her body while her lips utter silent curses in your face. Or have you ever heard the screams of dying children?" Drizzt let up his attack, but Zack would not allow a break. The weapons master came back on the offensive, each thrust aimed for a vital area. "How loud those screams," Zack continued. "They echo over the centuries in your mind. They chase you down the paths of your entire life." Zack halted the action so that Drizzt might weigh his every word. "You have never heard them, have you, Dancer?" The weapons master stretched his arms out wide, an invitation. "Come then, and claim your second kill," he said, tapping his stomach. "In the belly, where the pain is greatest, so that my screams may echo in your mind. Prove to me that you are the drow warrior you claim to be." The tips of Drizzt's scimitars slowly made their way to the stone floor. He wore no smile now. "You hesitate," Zack laughed at him. "This is your chance to make your name. A single thrust, and you will send a reputation into the academy before you. Other students, even masters, will whisper your name as you pass. Drizzt Do'Urden, they will say, the boy who slew the most honored weapons master in all of Menzoberranzan. Is this not what you desire?" "Damn you!" Drizzt spat back, but still he made no move to attack. "Drow warrior?" Zack chided him. "Do not be so quick to claim a title you cannot begin to understand." Drizzt came on then, in a fury he had never before known. His purpose was not to kill, but to defeat his teacher, to steal the taunts from Zack's mouth with a fighting display too impressive to be derided. Drizzt was brilliant. He followed every move with three others and worked Zack low and high, inside and out wide. Zack found his heels under him more often than the balls of his feet. Too involved was he in staying away from his students' relentless thrusts to even think of taking the offensive. He allowed Drizzt to continue the initiative for many minutes, dreading its conclusion, the outcome he had already decided to be the most preferable. Zack then found that he could stand the delay no longer. He sent one sword out in a lazy thrust, and Drizzt promptly slapped the weapon out of his hand. Even as the young drow came on in anticipation of victory, Zack slipped his empty hand into a pouch and grabbed a magical little ceramic ball, one of those that so often had aided him in battle. "Not this time, Zack Nefane," Drizzt proclaimed, keeping his attacks under control, remembering well the many occasions that Zack reversed feigned disadvantage into clear advantage. Zack fingered the ball, unable to come to terms with what he must do. Drizzt walked him through an attack sequence, then another, measuring the advantage he had gained in stealing a weapon. Confident of his position, Drizzt came in low and hard with a single thrust. Though Zack was distracted at the time, he still managed to block the attack with his remaining sword. Drizzt's other scimitar slashed down on the top of the sword, pinning its tip to the floor. In the same lightning movement, Drizzt slipped his first blade free of Zack's parry and brought it up and around, stopping the thrust barely an inch from Zack's throat. "I have you," the young drow cried. Zack's answer came in an explosion of light beyond anything Drizzt had ever imagined. Zack had prudently closed his eyes, but Drizzt, surprised, could not accept the sudden change. His head burned in agony, and he reeled backward, trying to get away from the light, away from the weapons master. Keeping his eyes tightly shut, Zack had already divorced himself from the need of vision. He let his keen ears guide him now, and Drizzt, shuffling and stumbling, was an easy target to discern. In a single motion, the whip came off Zack's belt, and he lashed out, catching Drizzt around the ankles and dropping him to the floor. Methodically, the weapons master came on, dreading every step, but knowing his chosen course of action to be correct. Drizzt realized that he was being stalked, but could not understand the motive. The light had stunned him, but he was more surprised by Zack's continuation of the battle. Drizzt set himself, unable to escape the trap, and tried to think his way around his loss of sight. He had to feel the flow of battle, to hear the sounds of his attacker and anticipate each coming strike. He brought his scimitars up just in time to block a sword chop that would have split his skull. Zack hadn't expected the parry. He recoiled and came in from a different angle. Again he was foiled. Now more curious than wanting to kill Drizzt, the weapons master went through a series of attacks, sending his sword into motions that would have sliced through the defenses of many who could see him. Blinded, Drizzt fought him off, putting the scimitar in line with each new thrust. "Treachery!" Drizzt yelled, painful residual explosions from the bright light still bursting inside his head. He blocked another attack and tried to regain his footing, realizing that he had little chance of continuing to fend off the weapons master from a prone position. The pain of the stinging light was too great, though, and Drizzt, barely holding the edge of consciousness, stumbled back to the stone, losing one scimitar in the process. He spun over wildly, knowing that Zack was closing in. The other scimitar was knocked from his hand. "Treachery!" Drizzt growled again. "Do you so hate to lose? Do you not understand?" Zack yelled back at him. "To lose is to die. You may win 1,000 fights, but you can only lose one." He put his sword in line with Drizzt's throat. It would be a single, clean blow. He knew that he should do. Merciful, before the masters of the academy got hold of his charge. Zack sent his sword spinning across the room, and he reached out with his empty hands, grabbed Drizzt by the front of his shirt, and hoisted him to his feet. They stood face to face, neither seeing the other very well in the blinding glare, and neither able to break the tense silence. After a long and breathless moment, the glamour of the enchanted pebble faded, and the room became more comfortable. Truly, the two dark elves looked upon each other in a different light. "A trick of Rolf's clerics," Zack explained. "Always they keep such a spell of light at the ready." A strange smile crossed his face as he tried to ease Drizzt's anger. "Oh, I dare say that I have turned such light against clerics, even high priestesses, more than a few times." "Treachery!" Drizzt spat a third time. "It is our way," Zack replied. "You will learn." "It is your way," snarled Drizzt. "You grin when you speak of murdering clerics of the Spider Queen. Do you so enjoy killing drow?" Zack could not find an answer to the accusing question. Drizzt's words hurt him profoundly because they rang with truth, and because Zack had come to view his penchant for killing clerics of Lolth as a cowardly response to his own unanswerable frustrations. "You would have killed me," Drizzt said bluntly. "But I did not," Zack retorted. "And now you live to go to the academy, to take a dagger in the back because you are blind to the realities of our world, because you refuse to acknowledge what your people are, or you will become one of them," Zack growled. "Either way, the Drizzt Do'Urden I have known will surely die." Drizzt's face twisted. He couldn't even find the words to dispute the possibilities Zack was spitting at him. He felt the blood drain from his face, though his heart raged. He walked away, letting his glare linger on Zack for many steps. "Go then, Drizzt Do'Urden," Zack cried after him. "Go to the academy and bask in the glory of your prowess. Remember, though, the consequences of such skills. Always there are consequences." Zack retreated to the security of his private chamber. The door to the room closed behind the weapons master with such a sound of finality that it spun Zack back to face its empty stone. "Go then, Drizzt Do'Urden," he whispered in quiet lament. "Go to the academy and learn who you really are." Demon came for his brother early the next morning. Drizzt slowly left the training room, looking back over his shoulder every few steps to see if Zack would come out and attack him again, or bid him farewell. He knew in his heart that Zack would not. Drizzt had thought them friends, and believed that the bond he and Zack Nefane had sown went far beyond the simple lessons of swordplay. The young drow had no answers to the many questions spinning in his mind, and the person who had been his teacher for the last 5 years had nothing left to offer. "The heat grows in Arvindale," Demon remarked when they stepped out onto the balcony. "You must not be late for your first day in the academy." Drizzt looked out into the myriad colors and shapes that composed Menzo Berenstain. "What is this place?" he whispered. realizing how little he knew of his homeland beyond the walls of his own house. Zack's words, Zack's rage, pressed in on Drizzt as he stood there, reminding him of his ignorance and hinting at a dark path ahead. "This is your world," Demon replied, though Drizzt's question had been rhetorical. "Do not worry, second boy," he laughed, moving up onto the railing. "You will learn of Menzoberranzan in the academy. You will learn who you are and who your people are." The declaration unsettled Drizzt. Perhaps, remembering his last bitter encounter with the drow he had most trusted, that knowledge was exactly what he was afraid of. He shrugged in resignation and followed Demon over the balcony, in a magical descent to the compound floor. The first steps down that dark path. Another set of eyes watched intently as Demon and Drizzt started out from House Doerden. Alton Devere sat quietly against the side of a gigantic mushroom, as he had every day for the last 10 days, staring at the Doerden complex. Daemon Anthracion, ninth house of Menzoberranzan, the house that had murdered his matron, his sisters and brothers, and all there ever was of House Devere, except for Alton. Alton thought back to the days of House Devere, when matron Jennifer had gathered the family members together so that they might discuss their aspirations. Alton, just a student when House Devere fell, now had a greater insight to those times. 20 years had brought a wealth of experience. Jennifer had been the youngest matron among the ruling families, and her potential had seemed unlimited. Then she had aided a gnomish patrol, had used her Lolth-given powers to hinder the drow elves that ambushed the little people in the caverns outside Menzoberranzan, all because Jennifer desired the death of a single member of that attacking drow party, a wizard's son of the city's third house, the house labeled as House Devere's next victim. The Spider Queen took exception to Jennifer's choice of weapons. Deep gnomes were the Dark Elves' worst enemy in the whole of the Underdark. With Jennifer fallen out of Lolth's favor, House Devere had been doomed. Alton had spent 20 years trying to learn of his enemies, trying to discover which drow family had taken advantage of his mother's mistake and had slaughtered his kin. 20 long years, and his adopted matron, Sinefe Hanette, had ended his quest as abruptly as it had begun. Now, as Alton sat watching the guilty house, he knew only one thing for certain. 20 years had done nothing to diminish his rage. Part 3. The Academy. The Academy. It is the propagation of the lies that bind drow society together. The ultimate perpetration of falsehoods repeated so many times that they ring true against any contrary evidence. The lessons young drow are taught of truth and justice are so blatantly refuted by everyday life in wicked Menzoberranzan that it is hard to understand how any could believe them. Still they do. Even now, decades removed, the thought of the place frightens me. Not for any physical pain or the ever-present sense of possible death. I have trod down many roads equally dangerous in that way. The Academy of Menzoberranzan frightens me when I think of the survivors, the graduates, existing, reveling within the evil fabrications that shape their world. They live with the belief that anything is acceptable if you can get away with it, that self-gratification is the most important aspect of existence, and that power comes only to she or he who is strong enough and cunning enough to snatch it from the failing hands of those who no longer deserve it. Compassion has no place in Menzoberranzan, and yet it is compassion, not fear, that brings harmony to most races. It is harmony, working toward shared goals, that precedes greatness. Lies engulf the drow in fear and mistrust, refute friendship at the tip of a Lolth-blessed sword. The hatred and ambition fostered by these amoral tenets are the doom of my people, a weakness that they perceive as strength. The result is a paralyzing, paranoid existence that the Drow call the edge of readiness. I do not know how I survived the academy, how I discovered the falsehoods early enough to use them in contrast, and thus strengthen those ideals I most cherish. It was Zaknafey, I must believe, my teacher, through the experiences of Zak's long years, which embittered him and cost him so much. I came to hear the screams of protest against murderous treachery, the screams of rage from the leaders of Drow society, the high priestesses of the Spider Queen, echoing down the paths of my mind, ever to hold a place within my mind. The screams of dying children. Drizzt Do'Urden. 12. This enemy, they. Wearing the outfit of a noble son, and with a dagger concealed in one boot, a suggestion from Demon, Drizzt ascended the wide stone stairway that led to Tir Bresh, the Academy of the Drow. Drizzt reached the top and moved between the giant pillars, under the impassive gazes of 2 guards, last year's students of Melee Magvir. 24 other young Drow milled about the Academy compound, but Drizzt hardly noticed them. 3 structures dominated his vision and his thoughts. To his left stood the pointed stalagmite tower of Sorcerer, the school of wizardry. Drizzt would spend the first 6 months of his 10th and last year of study in there. Before him, at the back of the level, loomed the most impressive structure, Eric Tynolith, the school of Lolth, carved from the stone into the likeness of a giant spider. By Drow reckoning, this was the Academy's most important building, and thus was normally reserved for females. Male students were housed within Eric Tynolith only during their last 6 months of study, while Sorcerer and Eric Tynolith were the more graceful structures. The most important building for Drizzt at that tentative moment lined the wall to his right, the pyramidal structure of Melee Magvir, the School of Fighters. This building would be Drizzt's home for the next 9 years. His companions, he now realized, were those other dark elves in the compound, fighters like himself about to begin their formal training. The class at 25 was unusually large for the School of Fighters. Even more unusual, several of the novice students were nobles. Drizzt wondered how his skills would measure up against theirs, how his sessions with Zaknafey compared to the battles these others had no doubt fought with the weapons masters of their respective families. Those thoughts inevitably led Drizzt back to his last encounter with his mentor. He quickly dismissed the memories of that unpleasant duel, and more pointedly, the disturbing questions Zak's observations had forced him to consider. There was no place for such doubts on this occasion. Melee Magvir loomed before him, the greatest test and the greatest lesson of his young life. "My greetings," came a voice behind him. Drizzt turned to face a fellow novice, who wore a sword and dirk uncomfortably on his belt, and who appeared even more nervous than Drizzt. A comforting sight. "Kel'Naz of House Kenefin, 15th house," the novice said. "Drizzt Do'Urden, of Daermon and Eshesbernon, House Do'Urden, 9th house of Menzoberranzan," Drizzt replied automatically, exactly as Matron Malice had instructed him. "A noble," remarked Kel'Naz, understanding the significance of Drizzt bearing the same surname as his house. Kel'Naz dropped into a low bow. "I am honored by your presence." Drizzt was starting to like this place already. With the treatment he normally received at home, he hardly thought of himself as a noble. Any self-important notions that might have occurred to him at Kel'Naz's gracious greeting were dispelled a moment later, though, when the masters came out. Drizzt saw his brother Demon among them, but pretended, as Demon had warned him to, not to notice, nor to expect any special treatment. Drizzt rushed inside Melee Magvir along with the rest of the students when the whips began to snap, and the masters started shouting of the dire consequences if they tarried. They were herded down a few side corridors and into an oval room. "Sit or stand as you will," one of the masters growled. Noticing 2 of the students whispering off to the side, the master took his whip out and, crack, took one of the offenders off his feet. He couldn't believe how quickly the room then came to order. "I am Hatchnet," the master began in a resounding voice. "The master of lore. This room will be your hall of instruction for 50 cycles of Narvendale." He looked around at the adorned belts on every figure. "You will bring no weapons to this place." Hatchnet paced the perimeter of the room, making certain that every eye followed his movements attentively. "You are Drow," he snapped suddenly. "Do you understand what that means? Do you know where you come from and the history of our people? Menzoberranzan was not always our home, nor was any other cavern of the Underdark. Once we walked the surface of the world." He spun suddenly and came up right in Drizzt's face. "Do you know of the surface?" Master Hatchnet snarled. Drizzt recoiled and shook his head. "An awful place," Hatchnet continued, turning back to the whole of the group. "Each day, as the glow begins its rise in Narvendale, a great ball of fire rises into the open sky above, bringing hours of a light greater than the punishing spells of the priestesses of Lolth." He held his arms outstretched, with his eyes turned upward, and an unbelievable grimace spread across his face. Students' gasps rose up all about him. "Even in the night, when the ball of fire has gone below the far rim of the world," Hatchnet continued, weaving his words as if he were telling a horror tale, "one cannot escape the uncounted terrors of the surface. Reminders of what the next day will bring, dots of light, and sometimes a lesser ball of silvery fire mar the sky's blessed darkness. Once our people walked the surface of the world," he repeated, his tone now one of lament. "In ages long past, even longer than the lines of the great houses. In that distant age, we walked beside the pale-skinned elves, the Fairies." "It cannot be true," one student cried from the side. Hatchnet looked at him earnestly, considering whether more would be gained by beating the student for his unasked-for interruption, or by allowing the group to participate. "It is," he replied, choosing the latter course. "We thought the Fairies our friends. We called them kin. We could not know, in our innocence, that they were the embodiments of deceit and evil. We could not know that they would turn on us suddenly and drive us from them, slaughtering our children and the eldest of our race. Without mercy, the evil fairies pursued us across the surface world. Always we asked for peace, and always we were answered by swords and killing arrows." He paused, his face twisting into a widening, malicious smile. "Then we found the goddess." "Praise Lolth!" came one anonymous cry. Again, Hatchnet let the slip of tongue go by unpunished, knowing that every accenting comment only drew his audience deeper into his web of rhetoric. "Indeed," the master replied. "All praise to the Spider Queen. It was she who took our orphaned race to her side and helped us fight off our enemies. It was she who guided the four matrons of our race to the paradise of the Underdark. It is she," he roared, a clenched fist rising into the air, "who now gives us the strength and the magic to pay back our enemies. We are the Drow," Hatchnet cried. "You are the Drow, never again to be downtrodden, rulers of all you desire, conquerors of lands you choose to inhabit." "The surface?" came a question. "The surface," echoed Hatchnet with a laugh. "Who would want to return to that vile place? Let the Fairies have it. Let them burn under the fires of the open sky. We claim the Underdark, where we can feel the core of the world thrumming under our feet, and where the stones of the walls show the heat of the world's power." Drizzt sat silent, absorbing every word of the talented orator's often rehearsed speech. Drizzt was caught, as were all the new students, in Hatchnet's hypnotic variations of inflection and rallying cries. Hatchnet had been the master of lore at the Academy for more than 2 centuries, owning more prestige in Menzoberranzan than nearly any other male drow and many of the females. The matrons of the ruling families understood well the value of his practiced tongue. So it went every day, an endless stream of hate rhetoric directed against an enemy that none of the students had ever seen. The surface elves were not the only target of Hatchnet's sniping. Dwarves, gnomes, humans, halflings, and all of the surface races, and even subterranean races, such as the Duergar dwarves, which the Drow often traded with and fought beside, each found an unpleasant spot in the Master's ranting. Drizzt came to understand why no weapons were permitted in the Oval Chamber. When he left his lesson each day, he found his
Hey,
hands
James
clenched by
Money,
his
how you
sides in
doing?
rage, unconsciously grasping for a
Hope
scimitar
you're
hilt.
doing good.
It was obvious from the commonplace fights among the students that others felt the same way. Always, though, the overriding factor that kept some measure of control was the Master's lie of the horrors of the outside world, and the comforting bond of the students' common heritage. A heritage, the students would soon come to believe, that gave them enough enemies to battle beyond each other. The long, draining hours in the Oval Chamber left little time for the students to mingle. They shared common barracks, but their extensive duties outside of Hatchnet's lessons, serving the older students and masters, preparing meals, and cleaning the building, gave them barely enough time for rest. By the end of the first 10 days, they walked on the edge of exhaustion, a condition, Drizzt realized, that only increased the stirring effect of Master Hatchnet's lessons. Drizzt accepted the existence stoically, considering it far better than the 6 years he had served his mother and sisters as page prince. Still, there was one great disappointment to Drizzt in his first 10 days at Melee Magvir. He found himself longing for his practice sessions. He sat on the edge of his bedroll late one night, holding a scimitar up before his shining eyes, remembering those many hours engaged in battle play with Zaknafein. "We go to the lesson in 2 hours," Kel Naz, in the next bunk, reminded him. "Get some rest." "I feel the edge leaving my hands," Drizzt replied quietly. "The blade feels heavier, unbalanced." "The Grand Melee is barely 10 cycles of Narvandel away," Kel Naz said. "You will get all the practice you desire there. Fear not. Whatever edge has been dulled by the days with the Master of Lore will soon be regained. For the next 9 years, that fine blade of yours will rarely leave your hands." Drizzt slid the scimitar back into its scabbard and reclined on his bunk. As with so many aspects of his life so far, and he was beginning to fear, with so many aspects of his future in Menzoberranzan, he had no choice but to accept the circumstances of his existence. "This segment of your training is at an end," Master Hatchnet announced on the morning of the 50th day. Another master, Dinan, entered the room, leading a magically suspended iron box filled with meagerly padded wooden poles of every length and design comparable to drow weapons. "Choose the sparring pole that most resembles your own weapon of choice," Hatchnet explained, as Dinan made his way around the room. He came to his brother, and Drizzt's eyes settled at once on his choice. 2 slightly curving poles about 3.5 feet long. Drizzt lifted them out and put them through a simple cut. Their weight and balance closely resembled the scimitars that had become so familiar to his hands. "For the pride of Daermon and Ashespernon," Dinan whispered, then moved along. Drizzt twirled the mock weapons again. It was time to measure the value of his sessions with Zak. "Your class must have an order," Hatchnet was saying, as Drizzt turned his attention beyond the scope of his new weapons. "Thus the Grand Melee. Remember, there can be only one victor." Hatchnet and Dinan herded the students out of the Oval Chamber and out of Melee Magvir altogether, down the tunnel between the 2 guardian spider statues at the back of Tir Brash. For all of the students, this was the first time they had ever been out of Menzoberranzan. "What are the rules?" Drizzt asked Kel Naz, in line at his side. "If a master calls you out, then you are out," Kel Naz replied. "The rules of engagement?" asked Drizzt. Kel Naz cast him an incredulous glance. "Win," he said simply, as though there could be no other answer. A short time later they came into a fairly large cavern, the arena for the Grand Melee. Pointed stalactites leered down at them from the ceiling, and stalagmite mounds broke the floor into a twisting maze filled with ambush holes and blind corners. "Choose your strategies and find your starting point," Master Hatchnet said to them. The grand melee begins at a count of 100. The 25 students set off into action, some pausing to consider the landscape laid out before them, others sprinting off into the gloom of the maze. Drizzt decided to find a narrow corridor to ensure that he would fight off one against one, and he just started off in his search when he was grabbed from behind. A team? Kelnaz offered. Drizzt did not respond, unsure of the other's fighting worth and the accepted practices of this traditional encounter. Others are forming into teams, Kelnaz pressed. Some in threes. Together we might have a chance. The master said there could be only one victor, Drizzt reasoned. Who better than you, if not me?
Be right back.
Kelnaz replied with a sly wink. Let us defeat the others. Then we can decide the issue between ourselves. The reasoning seemed prudent, and with Hatchnet's count already approaching 75, Drizzt had little time to ponder the possibilities. He clapped Kelnaz on the shoulder and led his new ally into the maze. Catwalks had been constructed all around the room's perimeter, even crossing through the center of the chamber, to give the judging masters a good view of all the action below. A dozen of them were up there now, all eagerly awaiting the first battles, so that they might measure the talent of this young class. 100! Cried Hatchneck from his high perch. Kelnaz began to move, but Drizzt stopped him, keeping him back in the narrow corridor between two long stalagmite mounds. Let them come to us, Drizzt signaled in the silent hand and facial expression code. He crouched in battle readiness. Let them fight each other to weariness. Patience is our ally. Kelnaz relaxed, thinking he had made a good choice in Drizzt. Their patience was not tested severely, though, for a moment later, a tall and aggressive student burst into their defensive position, wielding a long spear-shaped pole. He came right in on Drizzt, slapping with the butt of his weapon, then spinning it over full in a brutal thrust designed for a quick kill, a strong move perfectly executed. To Drizzt, though, it seemed the most basic of attack routines. Too basic, almost, for Drizzt hardly believed that a trained student would attack another skilled fighter in such a straightforward manner. Drizzt convinced himself in time that this was indeed the chosen method of attack, and no feint, and he launched the proper parry. His scimitar pole spun counterclockwise in front of him, striking the thrusting spear in succession and driving the weapon's tip harmlessly above the striking line of its wielder's shoulder. The aggressive attacker, stunned by the advanced parry, found himself open and off balance. Barely a split second later, before the attacker could even begin to recover, Drizzt's counter poked one, then the other scimitar pole into his chest. A soft blue light appeared on the stunned student's face, and he and Drizzt followed its line up to see a wand-wielding master looking down at them from the catwalk. "You are defeated," the master said to the tall student. "Fall where you stand." The student shot an angry glare at Drizzt and obediently dropped to the stone. "Come," Drizzt said to Kelnaz, casting a glance up at the master's revealing light. "Any others in the area will know of our position now. We must seek a new defensible area." Kelnaz paused a moment to watch the graceful hunting strides of his comrade. He had indeed made a good choice in selecting Drizzt, but he knew already, after only a single quick encounter, that if he and this skilled swordsman were the last two standing, a distinct possibility, he would have no choice at all of claiming victory. Together they rushed around a blind corner right into two opponents. Kelnaz chased after one, who fled in fright, and Drizzt faced off against the other, who wielded sword and dirk poles. A wide smile of growing confidence crossed Drizzt's face as his opponent took the offensive, launching routines similarly basic to those of the spear wielder that Drizzt had easily dispatched. A few deft twists and turns of his scimitars, a few slaps on the inside edges of his opponent's weapons, had the sword and dirk flying wide. Drizzt's attack came right up the middle, where he executed another double poke into his opponent's chest. The expected blue light appeared. "You are defeated," came the master's call. "Fall where you stand." Outraged, the stubborn student chopped viciously at Drizzt. Drizzt blocked with one weapon and snapped the other against his attacker's wrist, sending the sword pole flying to the floor. The attacker clenched his bruised wrist, but that was the least of his troubles. A blinding flash of lightning exploded from the observing master's wand, catching him full in the chest and hurtling him 10 feet backward to crash into a stalagmite mound. He crumpled to the floor, groaning in agony, and a line of glowing heat rose from his scorched body, which lay against the cool gray stone. "You're defeated," the master said again. Drizzt started to the fallen drow's aid, but the master issued an emphatic "No!" And Kelnaz was back at Drizzt's side. "He got away," Kelnaz began, but he broke into a laugh when he saw the downed student. "If a master calls you out, then you are out," Kelnaz repeated into Drizzt's blank stare. "Come," Kelnaz continued. "The battle is in full now. Let us find some fun." Drizzt thought his companion quite cocky for one who had yet to lift his weapons.
Hey,
He only
Christopher,
shrugged and
how you
followed.
doing?
Their next encounter was not so easy. They came into a double passage, turning in and out of several rock formations, and found
You're
themselves
so
faced
tired.
off against a group
Okay,
of three. Nobles from leading houses, both Drizzt and Kelnaz realized. Drizzt rushed the two on his left, both of whom
You're
wielded
just so
single
tired.
swords, while Kelnaz worked to fend off the third. Drizzt had little experience against multiple opponents, but Zack had taught him the techniques of such a battle quite well. His movements were solely defensive at first, then he settled into a comfortable rhythm and allowed his opponents to tire themselves out and to make the critical mistakes. These were cunning foes, though, and familiar with each other's movements. Their attacks complemented each other, slicing in at Drizzt from widely opposing angles.
Yeah, he's
Two
a good
hands,
little one.
Zack had once called Drizzt,
He's not
and
even
now
a
he lived
year
up to
old
the
yet.
title. His scimitars worked independently, yet in perfect harmony, foiling every attack. From a nearby perch on the catwalk, Masters Hatchnet and Dinan looked on, Hatchnet more than a little impressed, and Dinan swelling with pride. Drizzt saw the frustration mounting on his opponents' faces, and he knew that his opportunity to strike would soon be at hand. Then they crossed up, coming in together with identical thrusts, their sword poles barely inches apart. Drizzt spun to the side and launched a blinding uppercut slice with his left scimitar, deflecting both attacks. Then he reversed his body's momentum, dropped to one knee, back in line with his opponents, and thrust in low with two snaps of his free right arm. His jabbing scimitar pole caught the first and the second squarely in the groin. They dropped their weapons in unison, clutched their bruised parts, and slumped to their knees. Drizzt leaped up before them, trying to find the words for an apology. Hatchnet nodded his approval at Dinan as the two masters set their lights on the two losers. "Help me!" Kelnaz cried from beyond the dividing wall of stalagmites. Drizzt dived into a roll through a break in the wall, came up quickly, and downed a fourth opponent, who was concealed for a backstab surprise, with a backhand chop to the chest. Drizzt stopped to consider his latest victim. He hadn't even consciously known that the drow was there, but his aim had been perfect. Hatchnet blew a low whistle as he shifted his light to the most recent loser's face.
He
was
was
good,
asleep, but
The
now
master breathed.
he wanted me to go to
Drizzt
bed
saw
already.
Kelnaz a short distance away, practically forced down to his back by his opponent's skilled maneuvers. Drizzt leaped between the two and deflected an attack that surely would have finished Kelnaz. His newest opponent, wielding two sword poles, proved Drizzt's toughest challenge yet. He came at Drizzt with complicated feints and twists, forcing him on his heels more than once. "Bergen Jan of House Beanri," Hatchnet whispered to Dinan. Dinan understood the significance and hoped that his young brother was up to the test.
All right, go to bed.
Bergen Jan was not a disappointment to his distinguished kin. His moves came skilled and measured, and he and Drizzt danced about for many minutes with neither finding any advantage. The daring Bergen Jan then came in with the attack routine perhaps most familiar to Drizzt, the double thrust low. Drizzt executed the cross-down to perfection, the appropriate parry as Zack Defane had so pointedly proved to him. Never satisfied, though, Drizzt then reacted on an impulse, agilely snapping a foot up between the hilts of his crossed blades and into his opponent's face. The stunned son of House Beanri fell back against the wall. "I knew the parry was wrong," Drizzt cried, already savoring the next time he would get the opportunity to foil the double thrust low in a session against Zack. "He is good," Hatchnet gasped again to his glowing companion. Dazed, Bergen Jan could not fight his way out of the disadvantage. He put a globe of darkness around himself, but Drizzt waded right in, more than willing to fight blindly. Drizzt put the son of House Baenri through a quick series of attacks, ending with one of Drizd's scimitar poles against Bourguignon's exposed neck. "I am defeated," the young Baenri conceded, feeling the pole. Hearing the call, Master Hatchnet dispelled the darkness. Bourguignon set both his weapons on the stone and slumped down, and the blue light appeared on his face. Drizzt couldn't hold back the widening grin. Were there any here that he could not defeat, he wondered? Drizzt then felt an explosion on the back of his head that dropped him to his knees. He managed to look back in time to see Kelnaz walking away. "A fool," Hatchnet chuckled, putting his light on Drizzt, then turning his gaze upon Demon. "A good fool." Demon crossed his arms in front of his chest, his face glowing brightly now in a flush of embarrassment and anger. Drizzt felt the cool stone against his cheek, but his only thoughts at that moment were rooted in the past, locked onto Zaknophane's sarcastic but painfully accurate statement. "It is our way." 13. The price of winning. "You deceived me," Drizzt said to Kelnaz that night in the barracks. The room was black around them, and no other students stirred in their cots, exhausted from the day's fighting and from their endless duties serving the older students. Kelnaz fully expected this encounter. He had guessed Drizd's naivete early on, when Drizzt had actually queried him about the rules of engagement. An experienced drow warrior, particularly a noble, should have known better, should have understood that the only rule of his existence was the pursuit of victory. Now Kelnaz knew. This foolish young Do'Urden would not strike at him for his earlier actions. Vengeance fueled by anger was not one of Drizd's traits. "Why?" Drizzt pressed, finding no answer forthcoming from the smug commoner of House Kennefin. The volume of Drizd's voice caused Kelnaz to glance around nervously. They were supposed to be sleeping. If a master heard them arguing. "What is the mystery?" Kelnaz signaled back in the hand code, the warmth of his fingers glowing clearly to Drizd's heat-sensing eyes. "I acted as I had to act. Oh, I now believe I should have held off a bit longer. Perhaps if you had defeated a few more, I might have finished higher than third in the class. If we had worked together, as we had agreed, you might have won, or finished second at the least," Drizzt signaled back, the sharp movements of his hands reflecting his anger. "Most assuredly second," Kelnaz replied. "I knew from the beginning that I would be no match for you. You are the finest swordsman I have ever seen." "Not by the master's standing," Drizzt grumbled back. "Eighth is not so low," Kelnaz whispered back. "Bourguignon is only ranked 10th, and he is from the ruling house of Menzoberranzan. You should be glad that your standing is not to be envied by your classmates." A shuffle outside the room's door sent Kelnaz back into the silent code. "Holding a higher rank means only that I have more fighters eyeing my back as a convenient place to rest their daggers." Drizzt let the implication of Kelnaz's statement slip by. He refused to consider such treachery in the academy. "Bourguignon was the finest fighter I saw in the Grand Melee," he signaled. "He had you beaten until I interceded on your behalf." Kelnaz smiled the thought away. "Let Bourguignon serve as a cook in some lowly house for all I care," he whispered even more quietly than before, for the son of House Baenri's bunk was only a few yards away. "He is 10th, yet I, Kelnaz of Kennefin, am 3rd. "I am 8th, said Drizzt, an uncharacteristic edge on his voice, more anger than jealousy. "But I could defeat you with any weapon." Kelnaz shrugged, a strangely blurring movement to onlookers seeing in the infrared spectrum. "You did not," he signaled. "I won our encounter." "Encounter?" Drizzt gasped. "You deceived me, that is all." "Who was left standing?" Kelnaz pointedly reminded him. "Who wore the blue light of a master's wand?" "Honor demands that there be rules of engagement," growled Drizzt. "There is a rule," Kelnaz snapped back at him. "You may do whatever you can get away with. I won our encounter, Drizzt Do'Urden, and I hold the higher rank. That is all that matters." In the heat of the argument, their voices had grown too loud. The door to the room swung wide, and a master stepped onto the threshold, his form vividly outlined by the hallway's blue lights. Both students promptly rolled over and closed their eyes and their mouths. The finality of Kelnaz's last statement wrought Drizzt to some prudent observations. He realized then that his friendship with Kelnaz had come to an end, and perhaps that he and Kelnaz had never been friends at all. "You have seen him?" Alton asked, his fingers tapping anxiously on a small table in the highest chamber of his private quarters. Alton had set the younger students of Sorcere to work repairing the blasted place, but the scorch marks on the stone walls remained, a legacy of Alton's firebow. "I have," replied Massage. "I have heard of his skill with weapons." "Eighth in his class after the Grand Melee," said Alton. "A fine achievement." "By all accounts, he has the prowess to be first," said Massage. "One day he will claim that title. I shall be careful around that one." "He will never live to claim it," Alton promised. Housed.
All right, everyone. I'm going to call Into This Life for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by, and everyone continues to stop by. I appreciate all y'all's support. Until next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe.